How did the FBI catch the leader of one of the most feared hacking groups on the internet? How did they turn him into a secret informant and send him straight back to the hackers who trusted him? And how did one captured hacker help the FBI uncover the identities of men they had been hunting across the world? For 9 months, his closest allies gave him their targets, their secrets, and their crimes, without realizing who was listening. So what mistake exposed Sabu? And how did the FBI turn that single mistake into one of the greatest traps in cybercrime history? To understand how the trap was built, you have to understand the chaos of 2011. A collective known as Anonymous had fractured, and from its most skilled members, a new, highly aggressive splinter group emerged. They called themselves LulzSec. They did not hack quietly to steal money. They hacked loudly to cause maximum humiliation. They breached the servers of Sony Pictures, the public broadcasting service, and Fox. They compromised InfraGard, a private organization affiliated with the FBI. They took down the public website of the Central Intelligence Agency, and the undisputed leader of this digital insurgency was a hacker known as Sabu. Sabu was brilliant, charismatic, and incredibly arrogant. He acted as the general of the operation, selecting the targets, recruiting the talent, and managing the public relations of the group. On Twitter, he openly taunted federal law enforcement, daring them to catch him. He operated with absolute confidence, hiding his true location behind a complex web of encrypted tunnels, virtual private networks, and chained proxy servers. But maintaining that level of operational security requires absolute, unrelenting perfection, and humans get tired. Late one night, Sabu logged onto his computer. He opened an internet relay chat client to connect to a private server where the group communicated. He typed his credentials and hit enter, but he had made a fatal, microscopic error. He had forgotten to turn on his anonymizing software. For a fraction of a second, before he realized his mistake and disconnected, his real, unmasked IP address pinged the chat server. It was a tiny digital anomaly, a brief flash of light in the dark. But federal investigators had been monitoring the infrastructure surrounding the group. They caught the flash. The FBI immediately sent a subpoena to the internet service provider associated with that IP address. They expected the trail to lead to a compromised server in a foreign country. Instead, the address resolved to a physical location in the United States. It pointed to an apartment inside the Jacob Riis public housing projects in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. The FBI began physical surveillance on the building. They were expecting to find a highly sophisticated cyber warfare specialist. Instead, they found Hector Xavier Monsegur. He was 28 years old, an unemployed high school dropout, and the guardian of his 2 young cousins. He did not look like an international cyber mastermind, but he was Sabu. On the evening of June 7, 2011, federal agents knocked on his door. They did not kick it down with weapons drawn. They simply confronted him. They secured his hard drives, sat him down, and laid out the evidence. The charges against him carried a maximum sentence of 124 years in federal prison. But the FBI knew that for Monsegur, his own freedom was not his primary vulnerability. His vulnerability was his family. If he went to federal prison for the rest of his life, his 2 young cousins would immediately be placed into the foster care system. The agents offered him a choice. He could go away forever, or he could open his laptop, log back into the chat rooms, and go to work for the federal government. Monsegur flipped immediately, but the FBI did not announce his arrest. They did not parade him in front of the media. Taking down one hacker was a victory, but the FBI wanted to dismantle the entire global network. They needed the rest of LulzSec, and they needed the elite operators hiding deep inside the Anonymous collective. They set up a highly controlled environment. They installed keystroke loggers and screen recording software on Monsegur's laptop. They instructed him to log back onto the internet and act exactly as he had before. When Sabu returned to the encrypted chat rooms, his crew asked where he had been for the last 24 hours. He lied. He told them he had a power outage in his neighborhood. They believed him. The trap was set. The FBI effectively became the de facto leadership of the hacker underground. For months, Monsegur continued to coordinate attacks and direct operations. But every time a hacker shared a new vulnerability, confessed to a crime, or bragged about a successful breach, Monsegur was quietly logging the evidence and handing it to the agent sitting right next to him. The operation was producing incredible intelligence. But the ultimate payoff arrived in the winter of 2011, when a new, highly dangerous figure stepped into the chat room. His alias was Anarchaos. His real name was Jeremy Hammond. Unlike the hackers of LulzSec, who hacked primarily for amusement, Hammond was a brilliant, ideologically driven operator from Chicago. He viewed hacking as a weapon of political warfare, and he had set his sights on a massive target: a private global intelligence firm called Stratfor. Stratfor provided geopolitical analysis and security intelligence to massive corporations and government agencies around the world. Hammond believed the firm was an arm of the global surveillance state, and he wanted to destroy them. In early December 2011, Hammond found a vulnerability in Stratfor's external web servers. He exploited it, bypassing their outer defenses and slipping into their internal network. What he discovered inside was a hacker's dream. Stratfor had made a catastrophic security failure. They were storing the credit card information of their clients in plain text, completely unencrypted. Furthermore, Hammond found the internal email servers, containing over 5 million highly sensitive corporate communications. Hammond began quietly exfiltrating the credit card data. He used the stolen cards to make fraudulent donations to various charities, intending to cause maximum financial chaos for the intelligence firm. But the real prize was the emails. He wanted to leak the 5 million internal communications to the public to expose the inner workings of the company. But 5 million emails require massive amounts of digital storage. Hammond did not have a safe place to put the data. He needed a highly secure, anonymous server to act as a digital vault. He reached out to the one man in the underground he believed had the resources and the operational security to handle the job. He sent a message to Sabu, sitting in New York, with federal agents reading the messages over his shoulder. Monsegur told Hammond that he had the perfect server. He provided Hammond with the IP address and the administrative credentials to a machine that Sabu promised was completely anonymous and securely wiped. Hammond took the bait. He initiated the file transfer. He began moving the 5 million stolen emails out of the Stratfor network and into the server provided by Sabu. But the server was not anonymous. It had been purchased and provisioned by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It was physically sitting under federal control. The FBI agents literally sat in their office and watched the progress bar fill up, as one of the most wanted hackers in America voluntarily transferred the absolute proof of his own massive cybercrime directly into federal custody. But having the stolen data was not enough. The FBI needed to arrest the man who stole it. Hammond was incredibly careful. He always connected to the internet through the Tor network, routing his traffic through multiple encrypted nodes across the globe. The FBI could see the data arriving on their server, but the incoming IP address belonged to a Tor exit node. They had no idea where in the physical world Hammond was actually sitting. To find him, the FBI needed Sabu to use the oldest trick in the history of espionage: social engineering. They instructed Monsegur to keep Hammond talking. Over the next several weeks, Sabu engaged Hammond in long, casual conversations. The goal was to make Hammond comfortable, to get him typing freely, and to wait for him to make a mistake. Sabu had to act perfectly normal, using the exact same slang and rhythm he always used, knowing that a single misstep would cause Hammond to wipe his hard drives and vanish. The strategy worked. As they chatted about politics, hacking, and daily life, Hammond began to drop tiny fragments of his real identity. He casually mentioned that he lived in a specific time zone. He mentioned the weather. And critically, he mentioned that he had recently attended a specific political protest in the city of Chicago, and that he had been arrested at a similar protest in the past. The FBI took those fragments and ran them through law enforcement databases. They cross-referenced known hackers with arrest records for political protests in Chicago. The search algorithm spit out a name, Jeremy Hammond. The FBI immediately pulled Hammond's profile. He had a prior conviction for hacking. He lived in Chicago. The profile matched perfectly. But the investigators could not simply kick down his door. If Hammond heard the police breaking into his house, he would immediately initiate an encryption sequence on his computer. Modern encryption is mathematically unbreakable. If the hard drive's locked, the FBI would have a suspect, but they would lose the physical evidence tying him to the Stratfor breach. They needed to catch him while the computer was awake, unencrypted, and actively connected to the internet. The FBI established physical surveillance on Hammond's house in Chicago. They parked undercover vehicles on his street. They watched his windows. They waited for the exact moment he began communicating with Sabu. On the night of March 5, 2012, Monsegur sent a message to Hammond. Hammond replied. In Chicago, the surveillance team saw the glow of a computer monitor illuminating the window of Hammond's house. They knew he was at the keyboard. The hard drives were unlocked. The tactical team moved. They did not knock. They violently breached the doors of the house, deploying flashbangs to disorient the occupants. Agents flooded into the room, tackling Jeremy Hammond away from his desk before his hands could even reach the keyboard to execute a kill switch. They secured the laptop exactly as it was, fully decrypted, with the chat window to Sabu still open on the screen. But Hammond was not the only target that night. The FBI had spent 9 months using Monsegur to map the entire hierarchy of LulzSec and the elite tiers of Anonymous. They had identified the key operators located in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Ireland. As the agents tackled Hammond in Chicago, international law enforcement agencies executed simultaneous, synchronized raids across the globe. Doors were kicked down in London. Houses were raided in Dublin. The core leadership of the most notorious hacking collective on Earth was completely dismantled in a single, devastating sweep. The next morning, the federal court in New York unsealed the indictments. When the hacker underground woke up and checked the news, a wave of absolute horror washed over the internet. The court documents revealed the truth. Sabu, their hero, the untouchable digital kingpin who had led their operations and stored their secrets, had been an FBI informant since the very beginning. The realization was psychologically devastating. Every target they had discussed, every exploit they had shared, every piece of stolen data they had transferred over the last 9 months had gone directly to the federal government. The legal consequences were severe. Jeremy Hammond was charged with crimes relating to the Stratfor breach and eventually sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. The other members of LulzSec faced years of incarceration across multiple countries. But for Hector Xavier Monsegur, the outcome was drastically different. When it came time for his sentencing, the federal prosecutors stood before the judge and advocated on his behalf. They detailed his extraordinary cooperation. They explained how he had worked around the clock for 9 months, enduring intense psychological pressure to maintain his cover. They revealed that in addition to taking down his co-conspirators, Monsegur had secretly provided intelligence that allowed the FBI to patch vulnerabilities and prevent over 300 separate cyber attacks against government agencies and private corporations. Because of his unprecedented assistance, the judge reduced his potential sentence of 124 years to time served. Monsegur walked out of the courtroom a free man. The operation remains one of the most successful cyber sting operations in the history of federal law enforcement. The FBI did not just arrest a group of hackers, they weaponized the Internet's greatest asset, anonymity, against the people who relied on it. They proved that in a world where everyone hides behind a mask, the most dangerous threat is not the firewall you fail to breach. It is the friend you trust to hold your secrets. If there's an extraordinary true story you'd love to hear on this channel, tell us about it in the comments. And if you enjoyed this one, leave a like, join the channel, and stay with us for more incredible true stories.